The situation in the Odesa region is very difficult, President Volodymyr Zelenskiy said in his nightly video address. Unfortunately, the hits were critical, so it takes more than just time to restore electricity. It doesn't take hours, but a few days, unfortunately. Since October, Moscow has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure with large waves of missile and drone strikes. Norway was sending $100 million to help restore Ukraine's energy system, Zelensky said. Sergei Brachik, spokesperson for Odesa's regional administration, said electricity for the city's population will be restored in the coming days, while complete restoration of the networks may take 2 to 3 months. Brachik said an earlier Facebook post by the region's administration, advising some people to consider evaluating, was being investigated by Ukraine's security services as an element of the hybrid war by Russia. That post has since been deleted. Not a single representative of the authorities in the region made any calls for the evacuation of the inhabitants of Odesa and the region, Brachik said. Odesa had more than 1 million residents before the February 24th invasion that Russia calls a special military operation to denazify its smaller neighbor. Kyiv says Russia has launched hundreds of Iranian-made Shahed-136 drones at targets in Ukraine, describing the attacks as war crimes due to their devastating effect on civilian life. Moscow says its attacks are militarily legitimate and that it does not target civilians. Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office said 2 power facilities in Odesa region were hit by Shahed-136 drones. Ukraine's armed forces said on Facebook that 15 drones had been launched against targets in the southern regions of Odesa and Mykolaiv, and 10 had been shot down. Tehran denies supplying the drones to Moscow. Kyiv and its Western allies say that is a lie. Britain's defense ministry said on Saturday that it believed Iran's military support for Russia was likely to increase in the coming months, including possible deliveries of ballistic missiles.
Historic moon mission concludes with splashdown of Orion capsule. A 25-and-a-half-day uncrewed test flight around the moon meant to pave the way for future astronaut missions. The spacecraft is finishing the final stretch of its journey, closing in on the thick inner layer of Earth's atmosphere after traversing 239,000 miles between the Moon and Earth. It's set to splash down at 12:40 p.m. ET Sunday in the Pacific Ocean off Mexico's Baja California. NASA will air live coverage of the event, beginning at 11 a.m. The Orion capsule had been slated to splash down near San Diego. But NASA officials said Thursday that rain, wind and large waves had moved into that area, and it no longer complied with the space agency's weather criteria. This final step will be among the most important and dangerous legs of the mission. We're not out of the woods yet. The next big test is the heat shield, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson told CNN in a phone interview Thursday, referring to the barrier designed to protect the Orion capsule from the excruciating physics of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. The spacecraft will be traveling about 32 times the speed of sound as it hits the air, so fast that compression waves will cause the outside of the vehicle to heat to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The extreme heat will also cause air molecules to ionize, creating a buildup of plasma that's expected to cause a 5.5-minute communications blackout, according to Artemis I flight director Judd Freeling. As the capsule reaches around 200,000 miles above the Earth's surface, it will perform a roll maneuver that will briefly send the capsule back upward, sort of like skipping a rock across the surface of a lake. There are a couple of reasons for attempting the skip maneuver. Skip entry gives us a consistent landing site that supports astronaut safety because it allows teams on the ground to better and faster coordinate recovery efforts, said Joe Bomba, Lockheed Martin's Orion Aerosciences aerothermal lead, in a statement. Lockheed is NASA's primary contractor for the Orion spacecraft. By dividing the heat and force of re-entry into two events, skip entry also offers benefits like lessening the G-forces astronauts are subject to, according to Lockheed, referring to the crushing forces humans experience during spaceflight. As it embarks on its final descent, the capsule will slow down drastically, shedding thousands of miles per hour in speed until its parachutes deploy. By the time it splashes down, Orion will be traveling 20 miles per hour. While there are no astronauts on this test mission, just a few mannequins equipped to gather data and a Snoopy doll, Nelson, the NASA chief, has stressed the importance of demonstrating that the capsule can make a safe return. The space agency's plans are to parlay the Artemis moon missions into a program that will send astronauts to Mars, a journey that will have a much faster and more daring re-entry process. Upon return from this mission, Orion will have traveled roughly 1.3 million miles on a path that swung out to a distant lunar orbit, carrying the capsule farther than any spacecraft designed to carry humans has ever traveled. A secondary goal of this mission was for Orion's service module, a cylindrical attachment at the bottom of the spacecraft, to deploy 10 small satellites. But at least 4 of those satellites failed after being jettisoned into orbit, including a miniature lunar lander developed in Japan and one of NASA's own payloads. That was intended to be one of the first tiny satellites to explore interplanetary space. On its trip, the spacecraft captured stunning pictures of Earth and, during 2 close flybys, images of the lunar surface and a mesmerizing Earth rise. Nelson said if he had to give the Artemis I mission a letter grade so far, it would be an A. Not an A+, simply because we expect things to go wrong. And the good news is that when they do go wrong, NASA knows how to fix them, Nelson said. But, if I'm a school teacher, I would give it an A+. If the Artemis I mission is successful, NASA will dive into the data collected on this flight and look to choose a crew for the Artemis II mission, which could take off in 2024. Artemis II will aim to send astronauts on a similar trajectory as Artemis I, flying around the moon but not landing on its surface. The Artemis III mission, currently slated for a 2025 launch, is expected to put boots back on the moon, and NASA officials have said it will include the first woman and first person of color to achieve such a milestone.
Arizona governor builds border wall of shipping crates in final days of office. Deb Ducey is driving a project that is placing double-stacked old shipping containers through several miles of national forest, attempting to fill gaps in Donald Trump's intermittent border fencing. The rusting hulks, topped with razor wire and with bits of metal jammed into gaps, stretch for more than 3 miles through Coronado National Forest land, south of Tucson, and the governor has announced plans to extend that up to 10 miles, at a cost of $95 million. The area, with mountain ranges rising abruptly from the desert and a diverse environment of plants and animals, is federal land maintained by the U.S. Forest Service. Ducey had first experimented with a smattering of shipping containers in August in Yuma, in the southwest corner of the state, bordering California and Mexico, aiming to stop migrants and asylum seekers. Since Donald Trump implemented the Title 42 rule in 2020 when he was president, which closed ports of entry to most seeking asylum in the U.S., people have sought gaps and barriers elsewhere in order to request asylum from border agents. The rule appears still to be on track to end later this month, although a long legal battle is taking place. Ducey issued an executive order in August to erect old shipping containers near Yuma, and 11 days later workers had installed 130 of what he described as 22 feet high, double-stacked, state-owned, 8,800 pounds, 9 by 40-foot containers, linked together and welded shut. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Cocopa Tribal Nation said that Ducey was violating federal law by placing the containers on federal and tribal land there. In a letter, the Bureau demanded that the state remove the containers. But the state has not, and has since been emboldened to embark on the larger project, now proceeding apace more than 300 miles to the east. The Cochise County Sheriff, Mark Daniels, supports the new series of shipping containers being placed in his county, hoping it will deter crime and stop criminal behavior. But as the line of metal boxes snakes west towards adjacent Santa Cruz County, the sheriff there, David Hathaway, told the Nogales International newspaper that if anyone tries to put the containers in his jurisdiction, they will be arrested for illegal dumping. Dinah Baer, an attorney and former general counsel for the Council on Environmental Quality within the Executive Office of the White House, said Ducey's lawsuit was shockingly bad and frivolous. There's just no question that this is federal property, she added, as well as being public land, meaning there's no legal difference between the land they're putting the shipping containers on and Grand Canyon National Park. To block the project, she said U.S. Forest Service agents would definitely want a court order from a judge. They're not going to go down to the border and have a shootout with state police or arrest the governor at the Capitol. Federal Judge David Campbell, based in Phoenix, is presiding over the case. But no hearing has been called yet. The clock is ticking, Baer said, with courts backed up and the holidays approaching. The incoming Arizona governor, Democrat Katie Hobbs, who will assume office on January 2nd after beating Republican candidate Kari Lake in the midterm elections, has said she will remove the containers. Baer predicts Campbell will order the removal. But before that happens, they are being laid down by a contractor called Ashbrit, a Florida-based disaster remediation firm. A local media investigation found that Ducey's announced $6 million cost for the Yuma barriers had actually cost $13 million. Daily protests by locals alarmed at the project have slowed what was breakneck speed installation. Meanwhile, Mark Ruggiero, the former Sierra Vista District Ranger for the U.S. Forest Service in Cochise County, said the shipping containers are a hazard that jeopardize a binational firefighting agreement with Mexico. I was shocked to see this barrier going in, he said. It's an illegal action on public land. As a barrier for humans, the double-stacked boxes are not much of an obstacle. But they are an existential threat to endangered migratory species, especially jaguars and ocelots, as well as being an eyesore. Emily Burns, program director for Sky Island Alliance, a binational conservation nonprofit that tracks wildlife in the Coronado National Forest, said, there was no environmental review or planning or mitigation that was done. The Center for Biological Diversity was allowed to join the federal government as a defendant in Ducey's lawsuit and has slammed the barrier as damaging and a political stunt. Meanwhile, Burns noted that her organization has 70 wildlife cameras in this stretch of border and they rarely see migrants crossing there.